Part 12. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 111. In the small room in the courtyard, the heat brought by the stove made the room very warm. The candlelight was placed on the table, and several exquisite dishes were placed on the round table. The wine had been warmed and put aside. The Xiao family's family banquet was held at the Xiao mansion, and the Lu family across the street was also hosting a family banquet. However, there were too many people, and Su Buling would definitely not be able to join in because of his status. Mrs. Lu set up a small table in her room, and the two of them celebrate New Year together individually. After Mrs. Lu married into the Xiao family, she became a widow without even having the chance to support her husband and raise her children. She could not have a deep relationship with the Xiao family, otherwise she would not have lived alone in another courtyard. Although she felt a little bit resentful to Su Buletinling is dishonest, but this New Year's Eve dinner is indeed cooked by his own hands, and he takes it very seriously. After Su Buring and Mrs. Lu paid homage to their grandfather Su Lai and Princess Su who were far away in Suzhou, they sat down in the warm room, took off their winter clothes and shawls, and gathered around the round table in single clothes. The maids also came to the side room. It's time to eat in the house. Bang bang. Brilliant fireworks exploded from a distance and were reflected on the window paper. Mrs. Lu was wearing a close-fitting spring dress and took out a large purse from the tray next to her and handed it to Su Buling. Every year is safe. In the future, we must remember the teachings of our ancestors, be loyal, brave, upright and forthright, and do not disgrace the family tradition of the 3 generations of the Su family. Su Buling took it with both hands, took out a red purse from his arms, and handed it to Mrs. Lu. I wish Aunt Lu will become more and more beautiful. Mrs. Lu gave him an angry look. I'm a widow, what's the use of being pretty? Even though she said that, she still accepted it happily. Eat, eat. Su Buling raised his hand to pick up the chopsticks and turned his head to look. There were 2 bottles of wine on the table. The rich aroma of the wine hit his nostrils. He couldn't help but curiously asked, Aunt Lu, what kind of wine is this? Mrs. Lu's eyes flashed with pride. She picked up a bottle of wine with her bare hands, opened the cork and brought it to Su Buling. I had nothing to do a few days ago. I went to Sun's store to have a look and asked shopkeeper Sun to prepare some wine. See if it suits your taste. Su Buling came up and took a whiff. The wine smell was very strong, much stronger than the ordinary Duan Yu Shao. He raised his hand and poured a glass of wine and tasted it. A spiciness hit his forehead. It was completely high-grade liquor. Even he, who had experienced many battles, couldn't bear it. Well. Su Buletinling took a sip of wine and was so overwhelmed that he couldn't speak. He suppressed the alcohol and nodded, what a strong wine. Mrs. Lu was very satisfied, and filled Su Buling's wine glass with a crooked look. Do you like it? How does it compare with the Queen Mother's 2 jars? Su Buring couldn't say anything, so he nodded and said, yeah, I like it very much. It's much better than the 2 altars of the Queen Mother, but it's a bit stronger. Drink more if you like. Last time the Queen Mother had 2 jars of wine, but you drank most of it by yourself. Su Buling blinked his eyes. He gritted his teeth and wanted to finish the drink. He was celebrating the New Year anyway, so he didn't hesitate to have the New Year's Eve dinner with Mrs. Lu. I wanted to pour 2 glasses for Mrs. Lu to try, but unfortunately Mrs. Lu had obviously tasted it in advance, and the woman's family couldn't drink it at all. She prepared ordinary sake and drank it by herself, not feeling sorry for her nephew who was too drunk at all. The moon shines brightly on Kyushu. Some families are happy and some are sad. If you worry about killing people, it will be related to menstruation, so you have to rest somewhere and rest. People have joys and sorrows, and the moon waxes and wanes. Even on New Year's Eve, not every family happily eats the reunion dinner, which symbolizes family reunion. The Li mansion at the end of Kuishao Street is very different from the red lights of other mansions. White silk is still hung inside and outside. No one makes a sound in the mansion from top to bottom. The maids and servants go back and forth cautiously, for fear of making mistakes accidentally. The master who caused the pain of losing his son was beaten and scolded. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a time for reunion, but the Li family turned off the lights early. While other families were busy having a reunion dinner, a carriage drove out from the back door and passed through the deserted streets to among the houses. After the guards patrolled the surrounding area, Li Beiyi got off the carriage and walked slowly into a private house. It hadn't been long since Li Tianlu's death, and Zhonyang Ho, who was originally full of glory, now looked like he was 10 years old, with gray hair on his temples and no trace of his popularity on his face. There are only 2 legitimate sons of Li Beiyi, and they are both the pillars that will revitalize the Li family in the future. Now that Li Tianlu was beheaded and thrown at the door of his house, the murderer still lives on the same street, walking back and forth calmly all day long. As if nothing happened, how could Li Beiyi endure this blood feud? The Li family had lived in Kuishao Street for 60 years, and was far more loyal to the Song family than the king of Qi, who had an army with Ziliang. But now he has become a joke on Kuishao Street. How can he bear this shame and humiliation? Squeak. The courtyard door opened, and several men in short-sleeved shirts looked respectfully and bowed their hands. Li Beiyi raised his hand to let everyone out and entered the courtyard alone. Mr. Chen Si from Yangning Fang walked up to him respectfully, bowed his hands and said, "Master Ho, why do you have to come in person to let the servants go? If you want to find me, just say hello." Whether in the arena or in the court, there are always things that are difficult to deal with when one's identity is revealed. One side is black and the other is white. Without access, it is almost impossible to move forward. At this time, there needs to be a matchmaker in the middle, so that both parties can trust each other before things can be done. Fourth Master Chen traveled through the world of martial arts when he was young. He basically knew everyone from the black and white circles in the south and north. He had a lot of spies under his command, and he could be regarded as an information peddler in the world. Occasionally, when a wealthy family needs a little private work, or a charlatan wants to find a career, they would take the route of Fourth Master Chen. Li Beiyi walked into the room and sat down. He rubbed his fingers and was silent for a moment before he said, "There are some things that are difficult to deal with on the face of it. Help me find a few people. Remember, don't let anyone know if your head falls off." Master Chen Si sat down next to him and nodded with a smile, "Don't worry, Lord Ho. I, Chen Si, have been working hard in Chang'an for more than 10 years and I know all the rules. May I ask what is the matter that makes you so cautious?" Li Beiyi's eyes were gloomy. He raised his hand to let Master Chen Si lean over and whispered a few words. Master Chen Si's face changed, his smile disappeared, and he sat back down again, thinking for a long time. Such a powerful thug, who is the Lord going to deal with? Can it be done? Well, it costs more money. Li Beiyi snorted lightly, stood up, and walked out. When the matter is done, you can choose the official position of gold and silver. My Li family in Kuishao Street still has some background. Master Chen Si did not get up, but sat on the chair for a while before waving his hand to call his followers. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 112. A firework rose in the palace city, and the bright light spread throughout Chang'an. The first day of the first lunar month has arrived. In the small courtyard of Jinghua Yuan, the maids gathered together to watch the fireworks in the sky and chattered privately about their daughter's family. In the room at the back, the heat from the stove made the room a little stuffy. After 3 rounds of drinking, Mrs. Lu's cheeks were slightly red, her eyes were like a pool of spring water, and her eyelashes were curled as she looked at Su Buling. Perhaps because she was hot after drinking wine, Mrs. Lu unbuttoned one of the buttons on her collar, revealing a corner of the peony pattern on her belly band. However, both of them drank a little too much, so they didn't notice it. Well, outside the pass, beyond Yumen Pass is the desert, there is nothing interesting to see. Why should the Qiang flute blame the willows? The spring breeze does not reach Yumen Pass, that means there is no spring there. Su Buling was force-fed 2 jugs of strong liquor. After drinking the first jug, he knew he couldn't bear it. But when Mrs. Lu said, "You finished both of the Queen Mother's jugs," he had nothing to say. He drank it all on his scalp, and began to speak intermittently, obviously having a headache. Mrs. Lu didn't have much reaction to the sake she drank, except that she was slightly tipsy. She looked at it with a smile, and from time to time she put a piece of food with chopsticks to Su Buling's mouth. Why should the Qiang flute blame the willows? If the spring breeze doesn't blow through Yumen Pass, just a few sentences. 4 sentences, far above the Yellow River, among the white clouds, there is an isolated city called Wanren Mountain. It seems to have been written by Wang Zhiwen. Who is Wang Zhiwen? I've never heard of it. Yes. Su Buling struggled to think about it, dizziness came to his mind, and then he fell on the table with a plop. Mrs. Lu frowned slightly. This was the first time she saw Su Buling lying down. She felt a little funny and raised her hand to push Su Buling's shoulder. "Your Majesty. Your Majesty. I'm fine." Su Buling sat up again, blinked, and felt a little unable to bear it, so he stood up. "Aunt Lu, I'm going back first." Staggering and unsteady on his feet. Mrs. Lu was a little amused, and she quickly stood up to support Su Buling, but she never thought that Su Buling would easily hook her neck and lean on her. Su Buletinling is quite tall. He has a strong body due to practicing martial arts since he was a child. It is not easy to see when wearing clothes, but his weight is real. Mrs. Lu, who was half a head shorter than Su Buling, staggered under the pressure. She pushed the table and then raised Su Buling up, complaining. "You look weak, why is it so heavy?" "Aunt Lu, it's quite heavy." Su Buletinling was dizzy and replied in a daze. Mrs. Lu was stunned for a moment, thinking she was being called fat. She gave Su Buletinling a slightly annoyed look, then supported him unsteadily and walked behind the bead curtain. Su Buling was really drunk. He half squinted his eyes and sprayed hot breath on Mrs. Lu's neck, reaching deep into the skirt of her clothes. Mrs. Lu obviously couldn't bear it, but she had no choice but to purse her lips and call softly. "Ling-er. Ling-er. Wake up." "Well, I'm fine." After giving a vague response, she walked through the bead curtain and came to the curtain. With some difficulty, Mrs. Lu raised her hand and tried to help Su Buling lie down. Unexpectedly, her center of gravity was unstable and she fell directly onto the quilt. There was a slight creaking sound, and the curtain swayed a few times. Mrs. Lu whimpered softly, frowned slightly, and almost couldn't breathe due to the pressure. Turning his head to look, Su Buletinling was lying on top of her, his head resting on the side of his neck, and his breath was a little hot. Mrs. Lu was pressed down and almost fell into the quilt. She raised her hand and pushed Su Buling's shoulder. She wanted to sit up and position Su Buling properly, but she didn't expect that Su Buling's body was so strong and heavy that she couldn't push with all her strength. Mrs. Lu blinked her eyes and wanted to ask Yunu to come in, but after taking a moment to look at the current situation, her face turned red. How does this posture go with, and? As soon as the thought came together, Mrs. Lu couldn't hold back her anger, her heart became confused, and she anxiously wanted to push Su Buling away. "Ling-er. Get up quickly, you're crushing me. I'll take a nap." Still giving a vague response, Mrs. Lu pushed a few times, but instead of pushing Su Buling away, she woke Su Buling up a little. Perhaps because she felt uncomfortable sleeping, Su Buling touched her face with his hand, slid it down again, and caught it. Woo! Mrs. Lu's almond-shaped eyes widened, and her heart trembled violently. This damn boy actually. She had been a widower for many years and had always kept herself clean. She couldn't bear it. She raised her hand to cover her mouth so that she didn't make a sound. She grabbed Sue Bewling's hand with her other hand and tried to pull it away. However, she didn't have the slightest martial arts skills, so there was nothing she could do against Sue Bewling. Sue Bewling was obviously a little careless when he was drunk. An unspeakable strangeness came to her heart, and Mrs. Lu burst into tears. She wanted to close her eyes but didn't dare, so she pushed hard and her embroidered shoes hung in the air a few times, causing ripples on her skirt. Damn boy, where did you learn? Mrs. Lu endured it for a moment, but when Sue Bewling refused to give up, she reprimanded but did not dare to speak too loudly. She could only raise her hand and pat Sue Bewling's cheek, trying to wake up the drunken nephew. Unexpectedly, Sue Bewling was still a little dissatisfied. He exerted a little force, as if to warn her not to move. Mrs. Lu had never experienced such a battle before. Her whole body was trembling, angry and ashamed, and she resisted in vain. Sue Bewling pushed further, moving his fingers flexibly to the collar, unbuttoning the second cloth button, and opening the peony belly band. Yeah, no, wake up, I'm your aunt. Mrs. Lu was trembling all over and was about to cry. She was afraid that the maid would run in and see her. She held the half-opened skirt of her clothes and had no choice but to bite Sue Bewling on the shoulder. Ah dash! This trick was still useful. Sue Bewling stood up in pain and said in a daze, Aunt Lu, why are you here? The thief finally took his hand away, looked down at it in confusion, and then picked up. He raised his eyebrows. How could Mrs. Lu dare to lie down and talk? She hurriedly squeezed out from under Sue Bewling and hurriedly ran to the side. Her face was red and she was buttoning her clothes. She wanted to curse a few words, but she looked outside with a guilty conscience. Sue Bewling soon lay down on the quilt again, murmuring a few words indistinctly, and then fell silent. The night is silent and the lights are dim. Mrs. Lu was angry and annoyed. She stood there holding her clothes, her face turned red and white, her eyes kept looking at Sue Bewling, and she had mixed feelings in her heart. Huh. I don't know how long it took, but Sue Bewling fell into a deep sleep. Mrs. Lu turned around and opened the bead curtain to escape from the room, but as soon as she stepped out, she paused again, biting her lower lip and hesitated for a moment, then came back with a bit of anger, and stood next to Sue Bewling. He sat down and muttered to himself. You are heartless. If you are so courageous, you must have bullied many women behind my back, and you even said you would bring them back to show me. While speaking, Mrs. Lu bent down and took off Sue Bewling's boots. As she leaned over, her skirt fell tightly, outlining the mature woman's proud curves. Mrs. Lu didn't realize that Sue Bewling behind her had opened her eyes in a daze. As soon as she took off one of her boots, she was pinched somewhere behind her. She was so shocked that she jumped up and turned around, her eyes almost blazing. Do not allow it. Sue Bewling laughed drunkenly and fell asleep again. Mrs. Lu opened her mouth several times, but did not curse. In the end, she just stamped her feet. Damn boy, I really don't see it usually, pervert. Mrs. Lu waited for a long time, and after making sure that Sue Bewling was asleep, she quickly took off her shoes and socks with her hands and feet, and positioned Sue Bewling to lie down properly. Perhaps because he felt angry, he raised his hand and slapped Sue Bewling twice on the shoulder, and then hurriedly ran out. Guys, feel free to cast your recommendation votes greater than or equal to less than or equal to. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 113. The night breeze was blowing, and the courtyards between the neighbors were filled with laughter and laughter. There were also drunken scholars carrying wine bottles, humming tunes from their hometown in pairs. Guangdifang, located near the West Market, is populated by foreigners from all over the world. Most of them are foreigners, coming from the western regions and even further places. Some have taken root in Chang'an City, while others are businessmen who have stayed. Teams transport specialties from various places to and from thousands of miles away to earn huge profits. In the eyes of the officials and people of Chang'an, all those who came from outside the customs were barbarians, so few ordinary people came to Guangde Square, and the Siyi Pavilion was also built here. The mountains and rivers are in a foreign land, and the customs are very different. The New Year flavor in Guangdifang is not strong. People on the slightly narrow streets talk with foreign accents, and there are also disciples of different sects preaching and teaching on the streets. Jingle bell. Jingle bell. The crisp sound of camel bells passed through the street. Zhongli Chuchu was sitting sideways on a white camel, with a red gauze covering his face and wrapping his hair. His exotic appearance was not too surprising in Guangde Square. Occasionally he raised his hand to pick up the things lying across the street. Cloth Curtain walked around and came to the alley near Siyi Pavilion. It was late at night and there were no pedestrians in the alley. Zhongli Chuchu stopped the camel and waited for a moment before moving his eyes to the eaves on the side. "You've been following me for so long. Do you have anything to do with me?" Click. The sound of shoes stepping on tiles was heard, and a figure appeared on the roof. He was tall and holding a green sword. His face was covered by a bamboo hat, only his chin and thin lips were exposed. It was Ning Qingyi who had followed him all the way. The reason why Ning Qingyi wanted to follow him was because of what Zhongli Chuchu said: "Back then, I went to find a liar to help me with painting. I went all the way here to buy a jug of good wine and sent it to him. However, the liar made an excuse and said, 'It's hard to be beautiful in the world. Go back on one's word.'" Ning Qingyi's master, Gu Qiu, was the person who was referred to as "it's hard to paint a beautiful woman in the world" back then. Su Danking's emotional words brought her master great fame, but the troubles that followed were also true. It's small, and it continues to this day without stopping. The title of the most beautiful woman in the world is not so easy to use. Every year, the flower pickers who come to Evergreen Temple can be killed, and the jealousy of women is even more difficult to resist. There are always some women in the world who think highly of themselves. Not a few people are unconvinced and come to find trouble. Ning Qingyi knew that her mother had died because of her master's escape from marriage, and she was disheartened because she was hunted down by her family. She had already given up her secular life and became a monk. Even today, the matter is no longer pursued, but the Jianghu people are still holding on to it. Back then, a poisonous girl from southern Xinjiang came all the way to ask Su Danking to paint. After Su Danking agreed, he met her master and stopped writing. The poisonous girl from southern Xinjiang who failed to get water from the bamboo basket did not go to trouble Su Danking. Instead, she took out her anger on her master and made every possible effort to destroy her master's reputation. She didn't give up until the masters of Wudan came out to chase her away. Ning Qingyi was rescued by Jianghu seniors in Shu. He went up the mountain almost at the same time as Gu Qiu, so he knew these things very clearly. The woman in red in front of her didn't look like someone from southern Xinjiang, but several of her companions were obviously from the south. Based on what she just said, they were probably related to the poisonous woman back then, so Ning Qingyi followed her. At this time, Ning Qingyi was discovered by the other party and walked out, taking a brief look. "Do you know Ye Juniang?" When Zhongli Chuchu heard this, his green eyes revealed something inexplicable. Hateful or kind? Ning Qingyi drew 3 points of his sword, bringing out a cold light in the night. "There is a grudge. If you have any grudges, Go to her to report her. I have already severed our relationship as master and disciple. If you insist on taking action, don't blame me for not warning you. Zhongli Chuchu turned his head nonchalantly and rode a white camel towards the Sci-fi pavilion. Ning Qingyi was obviously surprised when he heard this. The other party admitted that he was the apprentice of that poisonous woman, but then said that he had severed the relationship between master and apprentice. Could it be that he was afraid of her revenge? Thinking of this, Ning Qingyi put away her sword and said calmly, "I won't kill you." Zhongli Chuchu stopped the camel, turned around and blinked his green eyes, with a bit of contempt in his eyes. "Are you Central Plains people so crazy? Not enough words to speculate." Ning Qingyi always spoke little. The 3-foot green sword in his hand was already unsheathed. He lightly stepped on the eaves tiles with his embroidered shoes. Then he rose into the air and stabbed Zhongli Chuchu with the sword. Zhongli Chuchu narrowed his eyes and quickly raised his hand. "Wait. S.A." Ning Qingyi's sword held up a sword flower halfway, whirled in a circle and landed on the ground. The long sword pointed at the ground and said coldly, "What do you mean?" Zhongli Chuchu was silent for a while, jumped down from the white camel, walked to Ning Qingyi holding the reins, and turned his head to look at it. "They say that women from the Central Plains are gentle, but you are also from outside the country, aren't you?" Ning Qingyi didn't waste any time on this kind of thing and asked directly, "What are you doing in Daiyue? Is Ye Juniang here?" Zhongli Chuchu crossed his arms across his chest and said with a bit of impatience, "Who are you? You have already said that I have nothing to do with Ye Juniang. I am just running around in the world. Do I have to say hello to you first? My name is Ning Qingyi, Ning Yuhi's disciple." Ning Qingyi's eyes were slightly cold. "Ye Juniang was stalking you back then, which made it difficult for master and me to clean up. The debt has not been settled yet. If you come here to seek revenge, I will accompany you to the end on master's behalf." When Zhongli Chuchu heard this, he became interested. He raised his hand and took off the red gauze covering his face, revealing a charming face that was obviously different from that of a Central Plains woman, and raised the corners of his mouth. "Are you Ning Qingyi? That crazy woman has been talking about you for many years. Let me see what you look like." It's obviously inappropriate to call the master a crazy woman, but in Ning Qingyi's view, calling Ye Juniang a crazy woman is a compliment. That woman is a complete scum who does everything possible. Ning Qingyi took off the bamboo hat and glanced at her with cold eyes. "What? Your master still doesn't give up and wants to teach his apprentice how to find a place?" Zhongli Chuchu walked closer, looked at it carefully as if admiring flowers, and nodded. "It's true. She took me in and taught me some useless things all day long, the music, chess, calligraphy, and painting that you Central Plains women like, so that I can go to Changqing to watch and avenge my shame. Alas, all the children in the world, for it was embarrassing for me to have such a grudge on my face, so I ran away." Ning Qingyi frowned slightly, but she was actually looking at the other person. After looking at him for a moment, she snorted lightly. "It seems that you are a sensible person and have not been led astray by your master." Zhongli Chuchu put on the veil again, jumped up high and sat sideways on the white camel, and said in a slightly lazy voice, "It's said that Xian and Bakui didn't end well in the end, so there's nothing to argue about. It's another generation, and the grievances and resentments in the past are not big grudges. We just started walking around the world, fighting over the trivial matters of our seniors. It's no fun to fight, let's make friends. Those who have different paths should not conspire with each other." "Oh! Ding dong dong dong." Zhongli Chuchu raised his hand, and the sound of the camel bell gradually faded away. Ning Qingyi frowned and thought for a moment, but didn't take it to heart, turned around and disappeared between the buildings. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 114. The morning light of the first day of the first lunar month shines in the Jinja villa, dispersing the cold fog that gathered last night. The pretty maids walked back and forth carrying basins and towels, whispering like birds announcing spring, with a bit of joy. The beautifully decorated wing was quiet, with the sea of tea, screens, soft couches, and bead curtains all staying in their original positions. The remaining wine and dishes on the table had already been cleared away, leaving only the warmth of the stove. Su Buling lay flat on the pillow, looking at the top of the curtain, frowning slightly, as if he was trying to remember. Last night, it seemed, that Aunt Lu. Su Buling was really drunk last night. Shopkeeper's son was a bit drunk and his head still hurt. But what made him more nervous than the pain in his head was the fragmented memories of last night. It seemed like something was being rubbed, it was big and soft. Su Buling's eyes were a little panicked, and he didn't want to admit that he could do such ridiculous and unscrupulous things when he was drunk, but the feeling in his memory couldn't deceive others. After he came to this world, he didn't seem to have done anything like that. Su Buling hesitated for a moment, then lifted up the quilt and looked down. There was no trace of the gun misfiring. He put down the quilt again and continued to think about it. It seems that the buttons were unbuttoned and the belly band embroidered with peonies was opened. Su Buletinling frowned and blinked, trying to tell whether it was a dream or reality, but the feeling was obviously real. He raised his hand and smelled it, and it seemed that Aunt Lu's unique milky scent still remained. Hiss. Su Buletinling turned over and rubbed his face to wake himself up. Looking around, this was naturally Mrs. Lu's embroidery bed. It's natural that Aunt Lu's bed has a lingering scent, don't think about it. Su Buling comforted himself a few words and looked around, trying to find any evidence left last night. Tread. Just after searching twice on the quilt, footsteps came from outside the house. Su Buletinling quickly lay down, covered himself with quilt, closed his eyes and continued to pretend to sleep. Your Majesty, get up. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Lu, dressed in a dark green winter dress, walked in carrying a tray. Her hair was styled into her favorite flowing bun, her mature cheeks were adorned with light makeup, she was dignified and charming, without any strangeness. Mrs. Lu held the tray in both hands, closed the door with palace shoes to prevent the cold air from entering, and placed the tray in front of the round table, which contained clear porridge, hangover soup, pastries, and other food. Su Buletinling half squinted his eyes and observed Mrs. Lu's demeanor and behavior. After making sure that there was nothing strange, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It was probably just a dream. If she really did something ridiculous and immoral, Aunt Lu would have to jump into the well with her conservative temperament. His image of an upright gentleman in Aunt Lu's heart was completely destroyed. Just that thrilling feeling. Thinking of this, Su Buling subconsciously looked at Mrs. Lu's clothes, leaning over to put things, the bulge was full of tension. Snap. Su Buletinling raised his hand and slapped himself, and cursed a few times. Where was the thief looking? She is your aunt. Mrs. Lu heard the noise and turned her head slightly to look at Su Buling behind the bead curtain. What's wrong? Nothing, I have a little headache, please wake up. Su Buling shook his head vigorously. Shitu made the messy thoughts in his mind disappear, stood up, put on his shoes, walked out of the bead curtain and entered the room. With a slight smile, Mrs. Lu put the porridge bowls on the table and said softly, today is the first day of the Lunar New Year. You made dumplings. Don't go out later. Come with me to Xiao's house later. Su Buling walked up to him, glanced at Mrs. Lu's profile secretly, hesitated for a moment, and then asked with a smile. Aunt Lu, did I drink too much last night? Mrs. Lu's expression was calm as usual, and she joked, you drank too much, and you couldn't wake up even if you were lying on the table, or you knew and I carried you to the bed. Oh. Su Buling frowned, sat down at the table, and smiled, well, I didn't get drunk last night. What did I say or do? Mrs. Lu sat down across the round table, looked at Su Buling's slightly nervous expression, and laughed. You don't know what it's like to be drunk. You chatted some drunken words, Wang's Hiwan and so on, I don't understand anyway. Su Buling secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed like it was really a dream. This dream was quite real. Even the peony pattern on his belly band was impressive, it was white. The more he thought about it, the more he thought about it. Su Buling, who was busy, concentrated on emptying his mind, lowered his head, picked up a spoon and prepared to eat. Unexpectedly, as soon as I reached out my hand, I was slapped by Mrs. Lu. Still not awake? Go wash up first, the water is boiled. Oh. Su Buling remembered this time, stood up with a smile, and walked out quickly. The door opened and closed, and the small boudoir became quiet again. Mrs. Lu's face gradually turned red at this time, with a bit of annoyance in her eyes, but she secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It's a good thing I don't remember, this damn boy. As she spoke, she remembered the scene last night again, and she couldn't help but sigh. He couldn't help but spat lightly and buttoned his clothes a little tighter. Hua hua hua. I remembered the sound of water splashing in the yard and the maids greeting me enthusiastically. Mrs. Lu sat at the table and rubbed her brows to relieve fatigue. I definitely didn't sleep last night. In the middle of the night, I almost jumped into a well because of my random thoughts. She and Princess Su are sisters, and they are married and still a widow. No matter what, she shouldn't be involved with men. Let alone being known to outsiders. The education she received since childhood made her afraid to think about what happened last night. But if she really jumped into the well, people would think too much of her. And if she died, Buletinling would be alone in the capital. How could she feel at ease? After thinking about it for a long time, Mrs. Lu could only comfort herself, just treat it as being touched by a child who has not grown up. The child is ignorant, why bother so much? It was not until dawn that Mrs. Lu thought it through a little. She was worried whether Su Buletinling would remember what happened last night. Su Buletinling's method last night was very experienced. He made her go back and change clothes in 2 strokes. He didn't look like an inexperienced man. What if he was pretending to be drunk? When Mrs. Lu thought of this, she shuddered and quickly threw the idea aside. Food and sex are human nature. Men are lustful by nature. A gentleman should move them with emotion and stop them with courtesy. Buletinling is such a good child. How could he be a dirty villain? He must have done something out of the ordinary when he was drunk. Mrs. Lu came over early in the morning just to see if Su Buling remembered what happened last night. Judging from his performance just now, he probably didn't remember it, so Mrs. Lu felt relieved and buried the matter deep in her heart, just pretending it never happened and never thinking about it again in her life. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 115. In the next few days, Su Buling spent his time visiting relatives and friends. As the Prince of Suwang, he didn't have to visit others, but the princes and generals of Kuishao Street would inevitably come to ask about his well-being. He didn't like these occasions very much. Mrs. Lu was the guardian who entertained the guests, and he just had to act cool. He was drunk on New Year's Eve, and he was actually a little panicked. He followed Mrs. Lu's butt all day, looking left and right, hoping to find out what happened that night through clues. But Mrs. Lu was normal, still treating him like a child who hadn't grown up, asking about his well-being and controlling him all day, and sometimes she would get angry when he didn't listen. After observing for a few days to make sure there was nothing unusual, he finally let go of his hanging heart. It seemed like he was just dreaming. But he was still a little confused about why he had such a dream. Could it be that it was really a puberty hormone explosion? He had to dream about Song Yufu, Xiao Manzi, and Miss Ning. How could Aunt Lu be in his dream? After thinking about it for a long time, Su Buling could only smile and pretend that nothing happened, as long as it did not destroy the hard-earned and pure relationship between him and Mrs. Liu. At the end of the year, every household in Kuishao Street was busy. Mrs. Liu was the daughter-in-law of the Xiao family. It was said that the head of the Xiao family would come over in the spring. There were a lot of things to do recently, and she could not accompany him all the time. Su Buling stayed at home until the 7th day of the first lunar month. After recuperating, he began to prepare for the plan to enter the palace to find the source of the dragon locking goo. This time, entering the palace was basically a fight to the death. He met the emperor directly in secret and tried every means to ask for the detoxification method of the dragon locking goo. It would be best if he could escape unscathed. If his identity was not necessarily exposed, the emperor might not kill him, but he would definitely be punished for threatening the emperor with force. Even Prince Su might be implicated and punished. But Su Buling was infected with the dragon locking goo and his days were numbered. Compared with waiting for unforeseen dangers, it was a way out to tear his face off and cause a confrontation between the two armies. It was a knife in any case, and at least he could bear it, which was better than being cut to death by a blunt knife. If he went to the palace to cause trouble for the emperor, he could not leave from Changal Palace. If he failed and alerted the enemy, he would be suspected of being on the list afterwards. If he happened to be in the palace, there would be no need to check, so he had to get an alibi. So on the 7th day of the first lunar month, Su Buling dressed up well, rode the wind-chasing horse out of Prince Su's mansion, and came directly to Song Baking's residence in Chang'an City. After Song Baking's wife passed away, he had been living in the Imperial College. However, the Imperial College was closed at the end of the year, so Song Baking took Song Yufu back to Zuji Street, where they had studied hard, and the father and daughter spent the new year in the old courtyard. Zuji Street was not far from the Imperial College. The alleys around the street were full of scholars who came to Beijing to take the imperial examinations. Dayu had a vast territory, and the number of students who came to Beijing to take the imperial examinations was like a stream of crucian carp crossing the river. Due to the underdeveloped transportation, it took a year or two to travel through mountains and rivers to reach Chang'an. Therefore, most of them stayed in Chang'an City, taking exams year after year, until they passed the exams or left when they were discouraged. Su Buling rode his horse at full speed to an alley on Zuji Street, looking from house to house. Before he found Song Baking's house number, he saw a pretty woman in a winter skirt sitting on a small stool at the door of a courtyard in the distance, muttering something. The sun in the first month of the lunar year shone in the old courtyard, dispelling the coldness of the first month of the lunar year. Several washed skirts were hung on the clothesline under the window, and the chickens, ducks, fish, and meat for entertaining guests in the evening were hung outside the kitchen. The yard was clean and spotless. During the new year, Song Yufu changed into a new skirt, a moon-white jacket and a vermilion pleated skirt, and a silver pearl hairpin inserted in her bun, on which a magpie was engraved. Although it was a common dress for girls in the market, it was more spiritual and elegant on Song Yufu, who had been well educated since childhood, and she was a little jade who had just grown up. Because Song Baking went out to visit friends, Song Yufu was alone at home with nothing to do, so she moved a small stool outside the courtyard gate and sat there in the sun. There was a collection of poems on her knees, but she didn't seem to be in the mood to read it. Instead, she was holding a small doll, kneading it and muttering, "Pervert, give me the hairpin back, or I will beat you." The brand new doll was bought from somewhere, and there was a small note on it, saying Su Buletin Ling. A curse? Song Yufu was working hard on the doll, and her eyes were full of relief. Whenever a pedestrian passed by, she would quickly pick up the poem book and quietly recite a few sentences of "Isn't it a pleasure to learn," and practice it from time to time. And then she would repeat it again when the person left. Ta-ta! The crisp sound of horse hooves came from far away. Song Yufu quickly put the doll on her legs, held the poem book and began to recite the sutra, and even hooked her hair, pretending to be very serious. But soon, she found that her arms were empty, and the puppet was taken away. Hey! Song Yufu was anxious and raised her head, but she saw Su Buling in white clothes, standing in front of her with a tall horse, looking at the puppet in his hand with a face as white as snow and no joy or anger. Ah! Song Yufu was so scared that her soul was gone, and her little face turned pale. Then she remembered something, and her face flushed again. She pursed her lips and lowered her head weakly, turned around on the small bench, and seemed to want to find the neighbors she knew around. Unfortunately, the alley was empty, with only Su Buling bathing in the sun. You have a vicious heart to cast a spell on me. No. No. Song Yufu raised her head in a hurry, her eyes full of weakness, and whispered, Su Shizi, I was just joking, I didn't give you an acupuncture, don't take it seriously, give me back the doll. She wanted to reach out to take it, but Su Buling couldn't reach it when he raised his hand. He could only shrink it back, stood up, and leaned against the doorframe, his eyes full of tension and embarrassment. Su Buling looked at the battered doll for a few times, and then hung it next to the saddle. Go out with me for a walk. Where, go? Yingchun Tower, I won't be back tonight. Ah! Song Yufu's face turned red, her hands curled up on her chest, and she shook her head like a rattle. It's nothing for young men and women to go out for a walk, and she couldn't refuse. But how could she not come back at night? A man and a woman staying outside all night, she knew what would happen even if she didn't know anything, and she would never get married in the future. Besides, Yingchunlu was a brothel, how could she, a girl from a scholarly family, go to such a place? Su Buling frowned slightly, don't waste time. I won't go. Song Yufu bit her lower lip, mustered up the courage to glare at Su Buling, and was ready to run back to the yard and close the door, but it was a pity that her slow movements were no match for Su Buling's agility. Su Buling stepped on the threshold on the other side to block his retreat. Miss Song, if you don't obey me today and follow me, the kiss you gave me last time in the bell and drum tower will spread all over the streets tomorrow. The tone and manner of his nonchalant manner were exactly the same as those of the dandies in Chang'an City. Song Yufu was ashamed and angry. She put her hands on her waist and said with a little suffocation. Su Shizi, you are a daughter, how can you be so unrestrained? Besides, you took advantage of me and threatened me. What advantage did I take? Su Buling spread his hands and looked puzzled. You kissed me forcefully, and it turned out that I took advantage of you. Why? Are you prettier than me? Song Yufu blinked her eyes and thought about it for a while. It seemed that she really couldn't find an excuse to refute. I am a girl, you are a man. What's wrong with being a man? Can't a man keep his body pure and be chaste? Can a man be taken advantage of by an unscrupulous lady at will? Oh Su Shizi, why are you like this? Song Yufu had no words to say. She tiptoed on the spot and said angrily, just think that I took advantage of you. I apologize, but I really can't go out with you to spend the night. At the end, her voice was as soft as a mosquito's hum, almost inaudible. Su Buling's eyes were calm. What's the point of apologizing? Either I kiss you and we're even, or you accompany me to Yingchun Tower for a stroll, you choose. Song Yufu's face flushed, and she shook her head like a rattle, obviously not wanting to choose either. Su Buling saw this and said nothing more, raised his hand and pinched Miss Song's chin, leaning over to prepare for an intimate contact. Song Yufu was pressed against the door frame and stood on tiptoe. Seeing Su Buling's cheek getting closer and closer, she was confused. She quickly covered her mouth with her hands and said in a muffled voice. Shut up, I'll go with you, you are not allowed to bully me. Su Buling was satisfied and let go of her hand and walked out of the alley. Don't worry, I don't like cucumber eggs. Huh. Song Yufu obviously didn't understand, but she didn't dare to ask. She ran back and wrote a note on the table, then ran to the bronze mirror to dress up a little, and then reluctantly locked the door. Please cast your recommendation votes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 116. Inside the Imperial City. The Song family's family banquet had just ended, and the concubines and princesses went back to their bedrooms. Several young princes, accompanied by their grandmothers, listened to the teachings of Emperor Daoyu. The Queen Mother was dressed up and sitting in the first place. Although she was too young compared to her position, her dignified demeanor was impeccable. She conscientiously fulfilled her responsibilities as an elder and sometimes coaxed the prince who was still babbling and learning to speak. Song Ji said when it comes to key points, she will nod slightly. Several princes are still young, the oldest is only 4 or 5 years old. They are all born to beautiful concubines. The mother's bad birth does not mean that she is a legitimate child. In a wealthy family, a concubine's son basically has no status at all, unlike his father. Everyone at the same table has extravagant hopes. However, Song Ji was very serious towards the young princes, neither showing favoritism nor neglecting them, and he conscientiously fulfilled his duties as a father. As the saying goes, no one is perfect, but capable people can often minimize their flaws. Just like Song Ji, no matter he was an emperor or a father, no one could fault him at all. Even as a husband, he had a deep affection for his late wife, which made people have to admire him. Because of her age, the Queen Mother and Song Ji were like mother and son, but they did not have much daily contact. At this time when she should give up the leadership to the emperor, she would not interrupt at will because of her status, but would just quietly act as a vase next to her. After waiting patiently for Song Ji to finish teaching the prince, the family banquet was completely over. Although it was the end of the new year, Song Ji never put down his political affairs for a day. Except for one night in the harem on New Year's Eve, he still spent the rest of the time in the imperial study. The Queen Mother was already accustomed to this and was not easy to persuade. After watching Song Ji and eunuch Jia leave, she asked the palace maid to send the young princess back to her mother's bedroom, while she took Xiao Yi back to Changle Palace. The chariot swayed through the red-walled corridor between the majestic palaces. The Queen Mother was leaning on the carved chariot, looking at the high palace wall next to her. Through the palace wall, she could vaguely hear the sounds of horse hooves galloping, soldiers shouting, and dragon and lion dances outside the wall. They were very far away. Seems to be another world. Xiao Yi was walking beside the chariot and saw the Queen Mother looking at the palace wall as if she had something on her mind, so she said, "Queen Mother, if you feel bored staying in the palace, could you please arrange a day to go out of the palace for a walk?" The Queen Mother's brows showed a bit of laziness. She withdrew her gaze from the palace wall, held up her cheeks and sighed quietly, "I am a bird in a cage, so what if I go out for a breather? I have long been used to it." Xiao Yi hesitated for a moment, then suddenly approached the Queen Mother and said softly, "My maid." The Queen Mother was very happy when she saw Prince Su coming. "Would you like to invite Prince Su to come and sit with her?" The Queen Mother blinked her beautiful eyes, hesitated for a moment, then shook her head and sighed, "It's the Chinese New Year, Hong Luan can't bear to part with her precious baby, I'm sure she won't come if I go to invite her, let's wait until after the Lantern Festival." "What about second young Master Xiao? That idiot Xiao Ting spends the New Year eating and drinking outside. He doesn't even want to say New Year's greetings. Why does he pay any attention to him?" Oh. When Xiao Yi saw this, she didn't want to say much. She sighed softly and accompanied the lonely Queen Mother back to Changle Palace. Just after the New Year, the lights, feasting, singing and dancing among the wells of Chang'an City far surpassed any other place in the world. The most lively place in Chang'an City is Day Square, and the most lively place in Day Square is Zhuangyuan Street. As for the most lively place in Zhuangyuan Street, Longjian Pavilion is the most lively place during the day, and at night, no one can overtake Yingchun Tower. The so-called four pests of the capital are not just in vain. There are many places for recreation in Longjian Pavilion, and the word elegance is revealed inside and outside. It is called the son of a rich man who comes in, and has a breeze on his sleeves when he goes out. He has no social status at all. Dare to go in. Yingchun House is a brothel, and the good guys who have been wandering around Zhuangyuan Street for many years have also given it a saying, enter the door to be a heroic hero, and go out to be a peach blossom. This naturally means that when you go in, you will be strong and powerful, and when you go out, you will be with your mother. He was so unsteady that he couldn't even stand still. Of course, these are all jokes among the people in the world. It is difficult for a brothel to become a gold-selling kill on par with Longjian Pavilion just by relying on its flesh and blood business. The main force in the brothel is still the Qinghua, who is excellent in both sex and art. In the afternoon, Su Buling led his horse to the outside of Yingchun Building, not far from Longjian Pavilion. The three-story building was covered with flowers, and orioles were leaning against the window to greet familiar guests. There were many carriages and horses outside the building, and countless young men who were either rich or noble came in to greet each other. Occasionally, famous talents or knights would arrive, and girls would come out to greet them personally, attracting envious eyes from everyone in the audience. Su Buling came here just to prove that he came to Yingchun Tower, so he would not keep a low profile. The horse chasing the wind and snow behind him was eye-catching enough. When some knowledgeable Jianghu people noticed it, they immediately turned their eyes away from the girls. Open, turned to the majestic and ordinary war horse. Chifeng horse is as tall as an adult man at the shoulder. When compared with the other horses outside the building, there is no difference between the other horses and wild donkeys. There is only one horse out of 10,000 Mobei horses, which is much rarer than the girl in Yingchun Tower. This kind of car is naturally the dream of wandering travelers. Many Jianghu people didn't even bother to look at Su Buling. They looked up and down a few times and then began to whisper. Is this the jade dragon that is the Holy One today? It seems so. The prince and noble son next to him, who had seen the world, laughed with a slight contempt. The tail of the jade dragon of the current emperor is white, and the tail of this horse chasing the wind is black. It is obviously the mount of Prince Su. At this point, the noble young man finally reacted and looked up. A quiet girl with a red face sat there. Looking to the side, he found Su Buling with a cold face and extraordinary temperament. Oh, meet the young prince. I didn't notice it for a moment. Please don't blame me, young prince. Hearing this, the bustling crowd finally knew who was coming. They quickly made way outside the building and looked at Su Buling with a little fear. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Song Yufu's face was like fire. She forced herself to be calm and followed Su Buling into the brothel. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 117. The sound of the piano is lingering in the Yingchun Tower. Su Buling came here because the Yingchun Tower is choosing an Warren tonight. Many girls are competing in piano skills together. It is expected to be a lively night. At this time, the orioles and swallows were reunited in the hall, and there were already girls on the stage singing "The wind has gone to dust and the fragrance of flowers has gone" to add to the fun. There were many people sitting in the hall and in the four rooms, including the princes, and nobles who were familiar with the Wenk garden. Su Buring was too lazy to be polite to this group of people. Lao Xiao had already booked a room and went directly to the second floor. Song Yufu came to the brothel for the first time since she was a child. Her expression was predictable. She followed Su Buring closely, her cheek almost buried in her chest. She was afraid that she would see some immoral scene when she raised her eyes. Keep your heels on. Su Shize, let's go shopping elsewhere. It's not fun here. Be honest, you're not allowed to go anywhere tonight. Song Yufu was shy and anxious. She wanted to run but didn't dare, so she could only follow Su Buling upstairs. There were many guests in the building. When Su Buletinling went upstairs, he happened to meet two Jianghu people walking down. The leader was a thin middle-aged man with fair hands and a calm demeanor. He was obviously a master of the inner circle. The one behind him is a strong man like an iron tower, with thick knuckles. Judging from the calluses on his hands, he is supposed to use gun and stick skills, and his momentum is equally impressive. When they met on a narrow road, Su Buling naturally couldn't give way to him. When the two Jianghu people saw that the person coming was a frail young man, they had no intention of giving way. If there was no accident, someone must have been carried out. Fortunately, the brothel manager who was following behind had a keen eye and knew that something was going to happen. He quickly stepped forward to smooth things over and introduced, "Little Prince, these two wild Taoists from the south of the Yangtze River, Wu Yu and Taijian Shuiyi, have just come to visit our host. If there is any, please forgive me if I offended you." Wu Yu and Shuiyi didn't expect that this young master was the son of a prince, and they couldn't afford to offend the people in the world. Following the words, they quickly raised their hands and made a courteous salute. "The common people have seen the young prince." Su Buling frowned slightly. The two strangers he had never heard of could not arouse his interest. He waved them off and then went to the private room on the second floor. Song Yufu slowly followed her into the room, thought about it, and then closed the door obediently. The harp and harp are playing in harmony, and the music and music are flourishing. Noisy noises and laughter kept coming from outside. The beautifully decorated room was equipped with soft couches, tea sets, chess tables, screens and other utensils. The materials were no less than the furniture in Prince Su's palace. There was a bead curtain on the side near the hall. Leaning on the soft couch behind the bead curtain, you can overlook all kinds of things in the hall, but you can't see the top from below. Judging from the shape and position of the soft couch, there should be a beauty lying in the arms of the distinguished guest lying on it, and even visiting tea sets, the fruit plate is all in the right place. Song Yufu had never been to this place before. She leaned against the door and refused to move, carefully staring at Su Buling, who might become animalistic and tear her clothes off at any time. Su Buling had no interest in talking to her, so he pulled the screen over to block the door, and took out a black package from under the soft couch. Lao Xiao had decided on the room, and had secretly placed the things he needed here. Opening the package, there were night clothes and other items inside, and a stack of banknotes next to it. When Song Yufu saw this, she suddenly became confused. She walked to the table with small steps, lowered her head and took a few glances. "Su Shize, aren't you here to listen to music?" Su Buling raised his eyes and glanced at her. "What? You want to cuddle up with me and listen to music together?" Spit dash. Song Yufu looked slightly annoyed and looked at Su Buling packing his things. "Are you going to sneak out at night?" There was a night jacket in the package, which was obvious. Seeing that it was still early, Su Buling sat down at the table and said casually, "I'm going out for a walk in the evening. You are not allowed to tell anyone what happened today. If you dare to say a word, you will change from a girl to a woman tomorrow." Song Yufu looked a little puzzled. "I am a woman. Only those who have left the cabinet are called women, and those who have not left the cabinet are called girls." Su Buling looked at Song Yufu and squinted slightly. "And I don't have any status, so I can only work as a maid in the palace, serving me tea and water, warming the bed and folding quilts all day long. Don't worry, I'm sure." Su Buling raised his hand to stop Song Yufu's words. "Don't say that, I won't feel at ease when you say it. Anyway, nothing can go wrong tonight, Otherwise we will go underground to be Mandarin ducks together, and you will be the little prince in the next life, and I will harm you. Song Yufu was stunned for a moment when she heard this, and then chuckled softly. How embarrassing. Su Buling took a deep breath, took out a stack of banknotes from the package, and placed it in front of her. I'm not kidding you. When the song starts later, you can reward any girl you like. If anyone dares to bid, you can give them a tael of silver until no one present rewards you more. Of course, you have to repay me. My name can't be known to anyone that I'm gone, do you understand? Song Yufu picked up a thick stack of banknotes with her little hand, counted them for a while, and quickly put them down in panic. This much money is enough to buy this street. I don't want. It's not for you, what do you want? Song Yufu pursed her lips, still a little hesitant, then, I spent all the money, you won't scold me, right? Su Buling chuckled lightly, if you can spend it all, you are considered to be very capable. As long as you do as I say, not only will I not hold you accountable afterwards, but I will also return the hairpin to you. Song Yufu's eyes lit up and she nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Don't worry, I will definitely spend all the money. This statement obviously missed the point. Su Buling opened his mouth, but he couldn't say much to the schoolmate whose head was full of muddle, so he could only nod. The room became quiet. Song Yufu sat obediently at the table. After putting down her psychological burden, she was also a little curious about the brothel at this time. She leaned out of the window to look at the scenery below, frowning and passing a few words from time to time. So Mr. Chen is so dissolute, Mr. Wang's smile is so obscene. Su Buling was too lazy to pay attention, leaning on the soft couch to calm down and concentrate, adjusting his physical condition to the best. When the evening drum sounded, he got up and changed into night clothes behind the screen. Song Yufu heard the rustling sound, her face suddenly flushed, closed her eyes and covered her ears, pretending to know nothing. After a long time, the movement in the room disappeared, and she turned around. Su Buling had disappeared in the room, and only a stack of silver bills was left on the table. Song Yufu breathed a sigh of relief. As soon as Su Buling left, she naturally became bolder. She looked around for a few times, then walked to the couch with some curiosity, leaned on the couch like a young master, twisted left and right and posed in a comfortable position. These dandies really know how to enjoy themselves. Song Yufu leaned comfortably on the couch, picked up the banknotes and counted them like a young lady, and thought of what Su Buling had said, and hesitated again. She was taught by her father to be frugal since she was a child. She must feel bad for spending money lavishly. As a scholar, money should be spent in the right way. It is wrong to pursue fame and fortune. How can I spend money in the right way in a brothel? Song Yufu thought for a moment, and suddenly she had an idea in her mind. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 118. The 108 squares of Chang'an City are decorated with lanterns like a sea, and the neighborhoods are like a checkerboard grid with buildings located among them. The majestic imperial city at the end of Zuk Street is taller than all the buildings. From a distance, it looks like an insurmountable high wall. The dome of the palace inside is faintly visible, showing some outlines in the moonlight. Su Buring was dressed in night clothes, speeding past the houses and walls at full speed, approaching the imperial city like a black shadow. The imperial city is very large, with 16 palace gates on all sides. Each gate must be guarded by an expert. The wolf guards, the outer secret guards, and the 5 imperial guards on the outside, surround the imperial city from the inside to the outside. The iron barrel array is as difficult to enter from the outside as it is to reach the sky. However, Su Buling did not lead the troops to force the palace, so the imperial guards naturally did not have to deal with it head-on, they could just avoid the tightly defended places. Changal Palace. Su Buling had already visited some places last time. There were experts but not many, and most of the places were empty. As night falls, the palace gate has not yet been closed, and the defense at this time is concentrated at the city gate. Su Buring came to the street adjacent to Yangchangfang and the imperial city. A large group of imperial guards stood nearby holding strong bows and crossbows and carrying lanterns to patrol back and forth along the city wall. Su Buling held his breath and waited quietly for a moment. When the guards patrolling up and down the city wall were far away and had yet to turn back, he suddenly set off and crossed the wide long street to the bottom of the city wall. 2 daggers slipped out of his sleeves. He penetrated the gap between the wall bricks and climbed up with the help of his body. He blinked like a gecko swimming on the wall and reached the bottom of the wall. After listening for no movement, he turned over and jumped onto the palace wall. The night is getting darker. A green lamp was lit in the imperial study room at the back of the Tai Chi palace. 2 eunuchs in red robes were standing at the door holding whisks. Directly in front of the Tai Chi palace was the Tai Chi palace. Several auspicious beasts on the top of the palace could be seen in the distance. From the Zuk gate to the Chengtian gate is the outer city, where the imperial guards are stationed. After entering the Chengtian gate, there are hundreds of secret guards. From the Chengtian gate to the outside of the imperial study, the entire Tai Chi palace is covered with stars. Whether it was Dai or the previous Daki, there had been incidents in history where brave warriors or dead warriors sneaked into the palace. Unfortunately, the walls of the Tai Chi palace were 3 feet and 5 feet high, and there were nearly 6,000 steps from the Suzaku gate to the imperial study room. A person can successfully break through the 1,000 steps, which means that he has not even entered the Chengtian gate, let alone the harem behind the Taiji palace. In the dead of night, with the sound of drums, the city gates of Chang'an City were closed one after another. The palace became quiet and became 2 worlds separated from the bustling capital outside the wall. In the imperial study room, Songji stood in front of Queen Kui's portrait, lit 3 sticks of incense and placed them on the incense table. He raised his head and stared at the scroll, his expression as calm as ever. Eunuch Jia came in with a pot of tea, put it on the table, and said comfortingly, "Your Majesty, the dragon body is important. If you have nothing to do, you should rest early." Songji put his hands behind his back and sighed quietly. "Have you found Jia Yi's whereabouts?" Eunuch Jia's wrinkled cheeks showed a bit of regret, and he shook his head. "Jia Yi has good talent, but he is too upright when he was born as a dead soldier. He still hasn't enlightened after many indoctrination. He may have been taken advantage of, it's more dangerous than good. The queen was close to Jia Yi back then, and even I couldn't do anything to her. Jia Yi loyally protects the Lord. After so many years after the queen left, I'm afraid he hasn't been able to let go. Everyone has his own destiny, so let him go. Jia Yi shouldn't have entered the palace. If he was in the Jianghu, in time his achievements would be no less than those of Liu Beiming. It would be a pity." When Songji heard this, he turned around and sat down in front of the imperial cabinet, and was silent for a while. In recent years, there have indeed been few outstanding figures in the world of martial arts. When I was hunting deer with Iron Eagle, my original intention was not to break the backbone of warriors and turn the world into a stagnant pool of water. It's just that those forces in the world of rivers and lakes have expanded their territory and have more people. I forgot my duty and began to think about getting involved in the court. There is still a group of young people who are secretly plotting to provoke a dispute among the 3 kingdoms and overthrow my world. Xia uses force to break the ban. I can't loosen my control, nor can I tighten it tightly. The majestic head of the Liu family in Donghai dare not even leave the Liu family's door. Speaking of which, it is a bit over the top." Eunuch Jia nodded slightly. Since ancient times, kings were mostly conceited and rarely reflected on their mistakes. But Songji is obviously not like this. As long as the minister's advice is true, even if he points his nose and scolds, Songji will happily accept the correction. However, Regarding overcorrection, eunuch Jia held different opinions. Martial men founded the country, and literati ruled the world. There were too many military men in the peaceful and prosperous times, which would cause hundreds of harms but no benefits. If no one restrains them, it will inevitably affect the people in the market. Well, but the restraint is too strict. The Jianghu people have nowhere to vent their energy, which will also encourage the trend of burning, killing and looting secretly. Chang'an is prosperous in public, but private fights in secret every year lead to heavy casualties. The daxing of the military examinations is supposed to give warriors a way out, but those Jianghu people believe in their innocence and refuse to join the army. I can't let go of government orders and let them kill each other without interfering. Wouldn't the world be in chaos? Eunuch Jia thought about it for a moment. What people want is nothing more than power, money, fame, and sex. People in the world are more interested in fame and sex. As long as they enter the world, they all want to occupy a place in the world. In the past, this name was earned through fighting. Yes, I won't let them kill them now. I can only argue with each other and no one is convinced. Liu Beiming's swordsmanship in the East China Sea is as good as that of Zhu Kexin. When people talk about sword master in the world, they only know the old swordsman Zhu Zhoushan but not Liu Beiming because Liu Beiming has never traveled around the world to gain reputation. The old slave thinks that we can start from this aspect. Song Ji picked up the teacup and took a sip. Although the matter of martial arts was a trivial matter, as the emperor of Daiyue, he would naturally not slack off if he could bring peace to one side. After thinking seriously for a moment, he looked at the scroll hanging on the wall. During the reign of the late emperor, there was the Suanhe 8 chiefs, which is still sung in the Jianghu market today. How about I personally create the Zhaohong 10 chiefs, and bestow the title of martial arts scholar on the world's rankings, so that the world's warriors can compete. Eunuch Jia walked up and nodded and said, there is such a saying in the world, but it has never become popular. As the saying goes, there is no second in martial arts. If the Holy One had personally opened the mouth and given the plaque, the world would be a lot more lively. In fact, the people in the market are most interested in the deeds of talented people, heroes, and beauties. People work during the day, and they can chat and relax in taverns and tea shops in their free time, which also helps to calm the people's minds. Eunuch Jia's words are very far-sighted. Even in modern society, the original purpose of the emergence of radio, television, and other things is to give the people at the bottom a place to relax when they are tired. Song Ji also became a little more interested. He thought about it for a while and nodded, I will discuss it with Xiao Xiang and others tomorrow. If it is feasible, I will send the edict. If there is no first place in literature, the talented will be exempted. As for the beauties in the world, go and find Su Danking for me, give him a pen, and ask him whether he will accept it or not. What about the candidates for the 10 Wukui? I'm not a Jianghu person. Do you have anyone suitable to recommend? Eunuch Jia carefully recalled the past and said in a deep voice, Sword Master Liu Beiming, Qinren Sek Sidu Yu Ejin, and Suwan Crown Prince Su Buling can be included in the list. It is difficult to distinguish between the others. You will have to go through a round to know. Song Ji was slightly surprised. Su Buling is only 18 years old, can he be among the top 10 in the world? Eunuch Jia nodded seriously, you have become famous at a young age. If you don't get the Dragon Lock Gu, you will be qualified to be ranked 10th. Song Ji didn't know martial arts, and the master he knew the most about was Eunuch Jia. He immediately asked, where do you rank among the 10 people? Eunuch Jia's wrinkled face showed a bit of humility. The old slave is already old, so he can be ranked behind Prince Su. Song Ji tapped his fingers on the table, shook his head and smiled. That's all, let's exclude you and let outsiders fight. Promise. The master and servant talked for a while, and suddenly a dark shadow fell outside the door and spoke in a deep voice outside the imperial study. Your Majesty, there are guests entering the palace. The palace door has been closed, and the guests coming at this time are naturally not invited. Ever since Iron Eagle hunted the deer, many people had sneaked into the palace city to seek revenge, and Songji didn't care. After eunuch Jia bowed and saluted, he slowly walked out and closed the door with a whisk in hand. I have been recommended to Channel 6 again. If I fail to advance to Sanjiang, I will probably have no chance. The big guys will reward me with a recommendation ticket. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 119. Who? In the huge Taiji palace, there was only the slight sound of the cold wind sweeping through the palace. Compared with the crowded imperial guards in the outer city, the corridors and imperial roads of the Taiji palace were empty and there was no one in sight. After Su Buling sneaked in from Changal Palace, he did not let his guard down, but was extremely cautious. According to his understanding, there were at least 100 masters around the emperor. Although he was in the corner of Taiji Palace, he was still 3,000 steps away from the imperial study, so it was impossible that there was no one. Now that he saw an unliving person, it could only mean that the guards here were hiding in the dark, and he could not find them. It took more than half an hour to walk from Changal Palace. At this time, he could not find the guards in the dark, but was restricted and did not dare to move forward rashly. Tap tap. Time passed little by little, and Su Buling waited for a long time in the dark until the eunuch who added lights at night walked through the corridor with a candle and checked the lanterns one by one. The crisp footsteps were heard far away, which naturally aroused the vigilance of the people around. Su Buling's eyes were like those of a night hawk, and he finally found a dark shadow moving under the eaves of a building. It should be turning around to check the situation. After knowing the position of the secret sentry, Su Buling secretly planned the route, stuck in the blind spot of the secret stake, and headed towards the imperial study deep in the Taiji Palace. Unfortunately, Su Buling still underestimated the strictness of the guards around the emperor. From ancient times to the present, no one has ever been able to get close to the emperor. Su Buling thought he could get closer, but he didn't expect that he would just walk 10 steps away, and the rustling sound of the night cat running came from far away. The sound was very slight, but it could be described as harsh in the quiet night. It was obvious that someone was coming towards him. Su Buling's face changed suddenly. He was discovered just after entering the Taiji Palace. He couldn't get to the emperor even if he had 100 lives. With the road ahead cut off, he immediately turned around and ran. "Don't run away, thief!" A sharp rebuke sounded from above, and a middle-aged man in a Taoist robe jumped out of the eaves, and the whole person fell down like a white crane, with the long sword in his hand already unsheathed. The young eunuch who was adding lights was shocked, and a bundle of red candles in his hand fell to the ground, making a dull sound of ding-dong-dong, and broke into pieces. 2 black shadows were startled between the surrounding buildings, and they flew up and rushed towards the side at the same time. The other secret guards were on standby to prevent the tiger from leaving the mountain. Su Buling had been discovered, and there was no need to hide his whereabouts anymore. He ran towards the palace wall like the wind, holding 2 black daggers upside down in his hands. Looking up at the Taoist priest falling from the sky, his brows could not help but frown. Although he had never seen this Taoist priest, this hand of white crane spreading wings was definitely not something that an ordinary bull nose could use. Since Dayo settled in Chang'an, countless aristocratic families had surrendered, and there were no fewer vassal forces in the rivers and lakes. Taoism has been in a high position since the previous dynasty. Wudan, Longhu Mountain, and other famous sects made a lot of efforts when the Song family pacified the world. After Dayo established its capital in Chang'an, they had a harmonious relationship with each other and sent masters to guard the imperial city every year as the emperor's personal guards. The Taoist priest in front of him was obviously from Wudane from his clothes. There are now 6 uncles in Wudane Mountain. According to the order, the one in the capital this year should be the third brother Chen Daoping. According to rumors in the martial arts world, Chen Daoping's martial arts on Wudane Mountain are second only to Wudane killer Chen Daozai. Although his fame is not as great as Chen Daozai, his martial arts are comparable to Zhang Xiang. As Chen Daozai appeared, the black shadows on the left and right also showed their figures. On the left is a strong man holding a 9-ring knife. The only family in the martial arts world that uses the 9-ring knife is Qin Renmin. The sect leader Sidu Yuejin is the number 1 in Tianese Wulin. The one present is probably Sidu Yuejin's younger brother Sidu Yueming. On the right is a woman, over 40 years old, using a 9-section whip. Although Su Buling had never seen her face, the reputation of 9-section lady was well known. She was one of the concubines of the previous emperor and had beaten his father Su Yu in Chang'an. Su Buling was secretly shocked after just a glance. He knew that the emperor was heavily guarded, but he never thought that he would run into 3 masters who were quite famous in the martial arts world more than 2 miles away from the imperial study. Su Buling was sure to defeat one person alone, but he had no chance of winning against 3 people under the condition of poisoning. If he was delayed and waited for other masters to arrive, even without the appearance of Jia Gong, these hawks and dogs would be able to gnaw him to the bone. Ah! It was a matter of life and death, and there was no time to think. Su Buling shouted, and the close-fitting black clothes on his wrists and calves were suddenly torn apart. The whole person jumped up like an eagle in the sky, and in the blink of an eye he came to Chen Daoping, who was falling. "Be careful!" Several shouts came from all over the palace, and they were obviously watching the action here. Chen Daoping, with his Taoist robe rustling, held a long sword with a snow blade, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. When Su Buling exerted his strength, he had already realized that something was wrong. In an instant, he turned from offensive to defensive, slashed the enemy with a sword, and reached back with his left hand to grab the beam under the eaves. Ding ding ding. Several crisp sounds, sparks flew. But in an instant, the 2 daggers in Su Buling's hand moved like the wind, and 3 knives bounced off the blades, and then stabbed Chen Daoping's throat and heart directly. Both of them flew into the air, and the speed of this move was beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Even if Chen Daoping pierced his 5 fingers into the beam, it would be too late to pull his body back with all his strength. Su Buling wanted to kill one person first, but unfortunately the 2 secret guards on the left and right were not mediocre. The woman in palace dress had already arrived below like a ghost. She threw the 9-section whip in her hand and directly wrapped it around Su Buling's ankle. She gave a delicate shout and pulled it down violently, smashing Su Buling to the ground. Chen Daoping took the opportunity to get out of danger, turned around, stepped on the beam, bent his knees and bounced hard, and unexpectedly fell down with the falling Su Buling, the sword in his hand reaching Su Buling's throat. The situation reversed in the blink of an eye. Under the vast night, in the majestic palace city, the 3 masters blocked almost all escape routes with a surefire attack. The glint of swords and shadows seemed to dim the moonlight in the sky. At the top of the Tai Chi Palace, Eunuch Jia hunched his body, looking at the 4 small dots in the distance to meet the enemy, and nodded slightly. "Lao Yi, this guest is interesting. He is holding a dagger, but he uses the technique of piercing the eyebrows. I'm afraid he is a junior from Shu who wants to take revenge. It would be a pity to die here." Next to Eunuch Jia, there was a man covered in black cloth from head to toe with only one pair of eyes exposed. He had 3 straight knives across his waist. He crossed his arms and said calmly, "After so many years, I still can't get rid of the problem of cherishing talents. There are countless talents in the world. In the end, those who survive to the end are called talents. Those who die midway are no different from useless materials." While speaking, Death Soldier B suddenly narrowed his eyes slightly, revealing a bit of surprise. I saw the assassin in a certain death situation in the distance, surrounded by swords, forcibly retracting his legs, and using the pull of the 9-section whip on his legs, he rushed towards the ground, regardless of the blade close at hand. Kicked the Jija Empress in the head. The 9 Festival Empress tried her best to pull down, but was thrown to the ground by the assassin who wanted to fly, but this time she pulled the assassin in front of her. With the combined efforts of the two, the assassin's speed was so fast that only an afterimage was left. By the time the 9 Festival Empress noticed something was wrong, a whip had already arrived in front of her head. The dragon swings its tail. So courageous. AncientChina had already seen something before he made the move. The killer move of flicking the leg gate was a dragon swinging its tail, and it was so easy to kick off a person's head. The 9G Empress was caught off guard and could not block it. And Situ Yueming's 9-ringed sword has reached the assassin's waist. Even if the assassin kills the 9G Empress by kicking her, he will definitely be killed by the combined force of the swords. It seemed like a desperate counterattack, but AncientChina saw some intentions. The Jija Empress was the concubine of the late emperor and the aunt of the current holy emperor. The assassin was sure that the two people present did not dare to let the Jija Empress die. Sure enough, the assassin kicked out, and the face of Situ Yueming, who was close at hand, changed slightly. When the assassin couldn't stop the assassin from killing people with his sword, he did not hesitate to use a stick, hitting the assassin and blocking him on the arms. The assassin took advantage of the situation and flew out, spun around in the air and landed firmly on the ground. He jumped up to the palace wall in a smooth motion and disappeared at the top of the palace wall in the blink of an eye. It was only then that Chen Daoping landed with his sword in the air. He held up his sword and said in surprise, "What a fast movement! Chase!" The Jija Empress turned pale, and with a bit of anger, she rushed out first. She hooked the Jija whip on the cornice, and jumped onto the palace wall more than 3 feet high in 2 moves. Situ Yueming held the 9-ringed sword with some caution in his eyes. The speed of breaking off moves is rare in the world, and he knows our basic skills. It will be difficult for the 3 of us to capture him. Chen Daoping certainly knew how the other party defeated the 3-man kill. If he didn't know the identity of the 9 Festival Empress's concubine, he wouldn't have been able to use his life-for-life move. It may be someone sent by the vassal king or an enemy country. We must capture him. After finishing his words, Chen Daoping looked towards the Tai Chi Palace in the distance. AncientChina lifted up his red-sleeved robe, and in an instant, more than 10 black shadows jumped out from all over the palace city, chasing towards Chang'an Palace at an alarming speed. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 120. The night is like a curtain. The situation in Chang'an Palace was calm, and the few palace residents did not notice the small conflict that occurred in Taiji Palace, and most of them had fallen asleep. Although it is rare for thieves to make trouble in the imperial city, it is not uncommon. As long as there is no big trouble and the city is not disturbed and everyone is awakened, it is enough for the secret guards to chase and kill them. Between the criss-crossing buildings, Su Buletinling walked through the darkness, silently and extremely quickly. The fight just ended in a flash, and no one was injured, but running at full speed was extremely draining of energy and could not last long. The pursuers at the rear were vaguely visible, and among them there were many masters whose Qinggong skills were better than Su Buling's. The distance was gradually getting closer. The secret guards lurking in Chang'an Palace have not received the message yet, but it will be a matter of time if this continues. Su Buling's plan to meet the emperor failed, and all that was left was to escape. If he hadn't forced out the news about the locking dragon goo and exposed his identity, he would basically not be able to do anything else in the future. Tap tap tap. There were still about 1,000 steps away from the east wall of Chang'an Palace, and footsteps came from the surroundings, getting closer and closer. Su Buling showed some anxiety in his eyes. He glanced around the dense buildings, gritted his teeth, and rushed towards a palace. The night is long and the moonlight is quiet. In a flash, it was the 8th day of the first lunar month, and the feeling of the new year gradually dissipated. The Queen Mother's bedroom returned to its former state of stagnant water, and all the maids fell asleep in the middle of the night. The Queen Mother was lying alone on the phoenix bed covered with golden silk quilt, looking at the empty room in a daze. The bedroom is large, surrounded by bookshelves, filled with her favorite Kit Kat objects. As the legitimate daughter of a noble family, she shouldn't be addicted to these things, but she became a widow after entering the palace. The interval between the Queen and the Queen Mother was only a few days. What can a beautiful woman do if she stays in a birdcage that she can never get out of? What? Every time the Queen Mother could not sleep in the dead of night, she would always think of the scenes before she left the cabinet. At that time, she had wild thoughts and did some ridiculous things that were laughable. After staying in the palace for 10 years, the former playful nature has long been worn away, and now all that is left is to find someone to talk to in the dead of night. It's a pity that this simple wish is out of reach for the Queen Mother. The thought of staying alone in this house for the rest of her life until the day she dies of old age makes her unable to sleep. There is always a lamp on in the dormitory, and the glass, jade, and other objects on the shelf are shining brightly. There are freshly carved dolls on the table in the distance. Originally there was a painting hanging on the wall, but unfortunately now gone. The Queen Mother looked at the empty wall and sighed. After looking at that painting for 10 years, I suddenly gave it away. Now I still feel a little regretful. The boy collected the things and did not come to the palace to pay New Year greetings. After tossing and turning, the Queen Mother not only failed to fall asleep, but was sweating a little. He raised his hand and lifted the quilt a little, revealing 2 golden koi fish. They turned over and lay on their sides on the pillow. The 2 were squeezed together, which made them feel a bit oppressive. Rustling. The Queen Mother groped under the pillow and took out a piece of rice paper. Under the dim light, she read a few lines of beautiful handwriting on it. When autumn comes on September 8th, when the flowers bloom, hundreds of flowers will be killed, alas. He stared blankly for a long time, then folded the paper and put it back under the pillow, turned over and continued to look at the table. After going back and forth like this several times, the Queen Mother gradually became sleepy and fell into a state of half sleep and half awake. In a daze, I seemed to see the window open and a person fly in, but there was no sound. The Queen Mother was not only not afraid subconsciously, but she was also afraid. After all, she had had too many nightmares like this in the past 10 years. It's better to dream about something that scares her than to do nothing. The black figure walked straight towards her, moving very quickly and still making no sound, but his figure was clearer. Wearing tight black clothes, covered from head to toe, he looks just like the flower picker in the painting. Flower picker. Picking flowers. The Queen Mother woke up suddenly, her beautiful eyes widened, her red lips slightly opened, and she was about to scream, but her mouth was covered by a big hand and she was pressed to the pillow. Woo, woo. The Queen Mother struggled violently, her eyes full of fear, and kicked off the quilt with her feet. At this time, she did not notice the scenery that could not be covered by her belly band. She raised her hand to slap the man in black, but unfortunately she was caught and pushed aside. Woo. Shh, it's me, little bulletin-ling, don't be afraid, Queen Mother. A very familiar voice sounded in my ears. The Queen Mother was stunned for a moment, then she saw the flower picker in front of her pulled down her black scarf and face, revealing a face that was unparalleled in splendor. Do you agree? The Queen Mother blinked, dazed for a moment, and then struggled and twisted even more crazily. The fear in her eyes turned into anger, with a hint of disappointment and contempt. Amid the stormy waves, the 2 golden carp seemed to be alive, unable to cover up the spectacular thing below. Su Bulletin-ling didn't know where to look, but he had no choice but to hold the Queen Mother down forcefully and whispered. Queen Mother, don't say anything. Someone is chasing me, shush. An ordinary woman would have been confused at this time, but the Queen Mother is not an ordinary woman. She has been able to enter the palace as a queen. She has been cultivated in adaptability and calmness since she was a child. In this extremely dangerous situation, she is highly concentrated. After hearing Su Buling's words, the Queen Mother noticed hurried footsteps running outside, and faint voices coming from the night. Go there. I don't know, don't disturb the Queen Mother. Did this thief escape to the Queen Mother's bedroom? Oh no, let's go check. There were a lot of people, and there were familiar voices among them. The Queen Mother was stunned, knowing that Su Buling must have caused a big disaster, and she kept silent for a while. Su Buling was anxious and could only say, Queen Mother, don't make a sound, I won't hurt you. After saying that, he didn't care about anything, directly lifted the quilt and crawled in, burying himself tightly. Woo! The Queen Mother's whole body was shocked, and her eyes were full of shame and anxiety. She wanted to get up but was hugged by Su Buling again, even his legs were entangled, almost sticking to her back, tightly fitting. Shh, don't talk nonsense. You still know that I am your aunt, woo. The mouth was covered again, and then the door of the room was pushed open.